And right now, an opportunity, courtesy of our friends at Local Environmental Services, to showcase a couple of those bits of correspondence. Every single Friday, Local Environmental presents a tradition we call Trash Talk! Yeah, that's right. And this one from Michael, who says, I was listening to Adam Sweet on your show, and he was talking about Alberta's climate plan and talking about hydrogen. And to be honest, Jesperson, he pissed me off. He came across as a propagandist, a marketer, and I believe that in 3 ways this could hurt the province. Wasting money and resources, in time, transition time I'm talking about, and thirdly, in giving false hope or expectation around the next big thing. You know, the very first things out of his mouth are Alberta oil and gas, and then hydrogen, and then carbon capture. All of this, says Michael, unsustainable and unviable. He says any talk about Alberta oil and gas always comes from a place that ignores that the rest of the world also produces and supplies it. Michael just throwing punches today. He says Alberta's oil and gas is not special, and as the world transitions, it will be needed and desired less and less. He says we're living and looking at the past with conversations like this. Now, carbon fiber, which Adam talked about, is indeed a growing and expanding industry, but the issue gets back to this. It can be produced from anywhere in the world. Now, Adam did talk about shipping bitumen and all of the emissions that go along with that, and you should listen to the interview if you missed it. He says, but let's also talk about hydrogen. Back to Michael. Any funding toward hydrogen projects outside of research is a waste of money. It's a greenwashing. It's a siphon for corporate ownership. It's executives and investors to steal government cash through subsidies, grants, and other fiscal mechanisms. You know, Edmonton's hosting like this big, huge carbon convention next week. The timing of Michael's email, very interesting. He says hydrogen production, Alberta's never going to be a global producer or exporter of hydrogen. It's unstable. It's expensive to transport. And he says in Alberta's at a massive disadvantage because we don't border an open body of water. He says are Albertans going to be happy when we start pulling water from our rivers, lakes, and underground reservoirs to produce hydrogen? Michael says anybody pushing hydrogen or championing at this point in time for commercial use is no different than the monorail salesman from The Simpsons. Monorail.
It's going
monorail. Michael says the public does need to be aware of greenwashing, Jesperson. We need to call out companies and organizations behind them, as well as our elected representatives, to sign off on these things as they're doing it, reminding them they could do more harm than good. He signs off, thank you for your time. A very polite Michael. I wonder if we're going to hear back from someone on this one, on Michael's take on hydrogen. And what about this one from Antagonized Avery? She says, honestly, guys, I was a little disappointed in Jody Geese-Ramsey on the show on your 420 episode. As somebody who is strongly in favor of decriminalization, harm reduction, and safe supply, I want there to be strong voices to advocate for these issues. Instead, Jody's interview felt like a hypocritical, woe is me kind of a moment filled with exceptionism and unacknowledged privilege. She bemoaned how unfair and corrupt it was that the government and public service officials profited from cannabis sales in the early days of legalization. That's a fair point. It oozes corruption and inequality, but with zero self-reflection or acknowledgement about she herself profiting from the cannabis industry. I mean, when Jody was charged with multiple drug-related charges, pleading guilty in 2017, she and her then husband claimed it was for activism, and the justice, Leslie Chapin, who tried her case, acknowledged it as that much. She said she had to recognize how much profit was made. It made Jody come across as bitter about the tide turning from her profiting to other people profiting. If she was truly doing this in the name of activism, wouldn't she have set up as a non-profit with the proceeds going back into the community she claims to support? Avery says, finally, the thing that was so unbelievable that prompted me to write this email when Jody likened her cannabis retail manager license declined to a same-sex marriage activist being denied the right to marry after legalization. What the actual fuck? This is giving me Danielle Smith claiming unvaccinated people are the most discriminated against in history vibes. You know, Jody, from one cis white hetero woman to another, your fucking privilege is showing and you need to check it. How is a license to run a business in any way the same as being allowed to marry somebody you love? You got a million other ways to make a living. You know, this community's been discriminated against, persecuted, and killed for simply loving someone. How dare you invoke the struggles of another community who objectively have been persecuted magnitudes more than the cannabis-using community to whine about not being able to run a business in Ontario. She says, honestly, Honestly, go to your nature retreat on Bowen Island, one of the most white woman privileged things I've ever heard, and reflect on how you can amplify other marginalized voices instead of using them for your pity party about not making more money off the people you claim to advocate for. That from a very antagonized Avery. Nobody pulling punches today. My second week in a row landing an email into the plants behind me. That's another 3 points for this guy. Friends, you can send us a trash talk anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. It is proudly presented by our friends at Local Environmental Services. The very best of Real Talk coming at you next week. We're back live the week after with a lineup of interviews you're not going to want to miss. Stay safe out there this weekend. Happy Earth Day, and we'll talk to you soon.